and welcome to the channel. There's this house at the end of our street. It's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. The kind of place I remember as a child. You cross the street to avoid it. Everyone in the neighborhood knows about it, but nobody really talks about it. Except on Halloween. That's when things get weird. Every year, a bowl of candy appears on the front porch. On Halloween night, it's always the same. A plain black bowl filled with the good stuff, like M&Ms and Reese's. Nothing cheap. No one ever sees who puts it there, and nobody ever stays long enough to find out. Just appears. The strange thing is, there's never any sign of life in that house the rest of the year. There are no lights, no movement, nothing. The windows are cracked. The roof is falling apart, and the garden is completely overgrown. Yet every Halloween, like clockwork, the candy ball is right where it always is. There's also this rumor. It's been passed around for as long as I can remember. Passed down from the older kids when I was younger. They say that if you take a piece of candy, you'll get good luck for the next year. A lot of kids in the neighborhood believe that. Some people think it's just a harmless tradition. Others say it's cursed. Me? I've always been somewhere in between. I haven't really bought into the whole good luck thing, but I can't deny that the house gives me a strange feeling every time I pass it. One year, though, something had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house, the sweets, the fact that no one knows about who's putting it out. All these years, I grew up hearing stories about this place. Some say an old man lived there. Others say he disappeared years ago, left the house behind, like a ghost town in the middle of a quiet little street. But nobody really knows the truth. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that no one had ever tried to find out. So I decided this was the year I'd do it. After the triggermen had left, and the streets were empty, I stayed behind. The ball was still there, just sitting on the porch like it always did, as if it had been waiting. My friends had gone home, and I could have followed, but something wouldn't let me. There was always a pull to this house, something I couldn't quite explain, as if it wanted someone to notice it, like it wanted someone to come inside. I said I would just stay and watch, just long enough to see if someone came to take the ball away, or refill it just to get an answer once and for all. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt it, this nagging sense of curiosity. It was as if the house was calling to me, waiting for someone like me to finally to walk through its doors. And that night, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I've been waiting for hours, hiding in the bushes across the street. The neighborhood had long since gone quiet. No more children running around in costumes. No more porch lights. Just me, the dark, and the house. The candy bowl still sat on the porch, untouched, since the last group of trick-or-treaters had passed. Nothing. No movement. The house was still and silent as it always was. I was about to call it a night, when something caught my eye. The front door creaked open, slowly and deliberately, as if someone on the other side had just pushed it open. But I didn't see anyone. There was no wind, no explanation. Just the door opening slowly, inviting. My heart was racing. I tried to tell myself it was just old hinges giving way. But deep down, I knew better. The house wanted me to come in. I stayed as still as I could, waiting to catch a hand coming out, sneaking the ball away as Halloween ended. Theories ran through my head. I thought maybe it was an old local who had either started or carrying on this local tradition. But nothing came of it. The door was open, a moor of darkness, gently breathing in the outside air. As I watched, it looked almost inviting. Invasive thoughts came into my head. I pushed away the idea that someone was in there, but I was politely invited to come in. Nothing looked overtly threatening. Sure, the house looked musty and old, but otherwise it was quiet and docile. I don't know what made me do it. I should have turned around and gone home, but I didn't. Perhaps I was too preoccupied in solving this mystery or some otherworldly possession. I accepted the perceived invitation. I grabbed my torch and crossed the street. My feet barely made a sound on the pavement. I reached the veranda. I glanced once more at the bowl of sweets, almost expecting something to happen. But the sweets were just sitting there, untouched. I took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The moment I stepped over the threshold, the air around me felt like it had changed. Thick, heavy. My skin crawled, as if I had just entered a room filled with smoke. But there was no smoke, just an overwhelming feeling of pressure, as if the house was pressing down on me. I shone the torch around, but the beam felt weak, swallowed by the darkness. The floor creaked under my feet, but not like normal old wood. Felt different, as if something was shifting beneath the surface, adjusting to my weight. It looked solid, and when I put my foot on the floor, it was hardwood. But as I walked, it just felt off. It wasn't just the floor. As I went deeper into the house, something in the air felt wrong too. It wasn't just the silence, or the darkness that swallowed the beam of my flashlight. It was the way the walls seemed to shift, only settling when my light landed directly on them. It was barely perceptible, dancing softly at the edges of my vision, too vague to ever be confirmed. I shook my head and put it down to nerves. The floor creaked with every step I took, but the creaks felt deliberate, as if something beneath me was adjusting. I felt my weight. I turned a corner behind me. The door that had been open was now closed. Without so much as a sound, my pulse quickened, but I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps I had closed it out of habit. I was too much in my head to keep track of everything. But then, as I turned around, the corridor seemed to stretch out before me, as if space itself was bending. I stopped shining my torch down the corridor. I could swear it was short, just a few steps to the next room. But now it seemed longer, as if the walls were moving, pulling me further in. It was late and I was tired. I would have preferred to do this with a clearer head. But unfortunately, I could not choose the time to immerse myself into this investigation, so I was stuck questioning everything I saw. My stomach twisted. I tried to tell myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the house felt alive, responding to me, watching me. The further I ventured, the heavier everything felt. The air was thick, like I was suffocating, each breath harder than the last, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. Despite the cold, my legs felt like lead. Each step took more effort than it should. First, I thought it was the fear catching up with me. Maybe the adrenaline was wearing off. But this was different. I felt like I was being drained. I wiped my forehead, trying to clear my mind, but it didn't help. My head was foggy, as if I hadn't slept in days. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 3 a.m. I couldn't even remember what time I'd gone in, but there was no way I'd been in there that long. Maybe I'd waited longer than I thought when I was outside, but even then it didn't make sense. I couldn't even tell which way I'd come from. It was as if the walls twist and shift behind me, rearranging themselves the moment I wasn't looking. I shook my head, trying to clear the growing fog in my head. I could hardly think straight, and my movements were slow and sluggish. It was as if the house was draining the energy out of me step by step. As I moved further inside, I started to see things. Clothes, old shoes, pieces of paper. Some scattered on the floor, others abandoned in the corners of rooms. At first I thought it was just rubbish from squatters, but when I looked closer, I saw that all the clothes looked like they belonged to children, young teenagers, scattered around, with the discarded remains of old costumes. Halloween theme, in varying stages of decay. Some looked newer, but in between were pieces that looked older than my parents. I looked at what I was wearing and came to the subtle. These belonged to others who had wandered in, like me, trying to find answers to the mystery of the candy bowl. The vital flight kicked in. Panic set in as a thought flashed through my mind. If this was what had happened to the people who had gone in and never come out, what had happened to them? Because whatever it was, couldn't be good. I picked up an old sweet wrapper, its edge brittle from age. I looked around, My flashlight caught glimpses of more wrappers. Shoes and bags left in the dust. They were just there. No sign of a struggle. No sign of what had happened to them. That's when it hit me. The candy. It wasn't just a harmless Halloween tradition. It was bait. A secret so tempting to the young that it was the perfect way to lure people inside and draw them deeper into the house. Like me, I turned back the way I came, desperate to leave. The door couldn't be far. I hadn't ventured that deep into the house, had I? But when I reached the place where the should have been, it wasn't there. The door was gone, leading into a pointless corridor that matched the few I'd already passed through. Panic set in and I tried another corridor, then another. Every time I thought I was heading for an exit, it never led to where I thought I was going, forcing me deeper into the house. It was as if the place was changing around me, trapping me inside. My heart was pounding as I stumbled back, desperately searching for the front door. Yet it was as if the house was alive, closing every possible escape route. I felt the floor shift beneath me, but it was worse than before. I could no longer call it my imagination, for it almost felt like it was melting into itself. I took another step, and my foot sank into the ground like quicksand. I pulled, but the floor held, sticky and thick, like it was pulling me down. The walls around me began to pulsate, to close in. The house was tightening its grip. I pounded my fists against the walls, screaming for help, but no sound escaped. My voice was muffled, swallowed by the thick, choking air. No one could hear me. The house absorbed everything. Something was feeding on me. The house became more intense the weaker I felt. The more I tried to escape, the more the house drained me. My legs felt heavy, my breath shallow. It wasn't just fear. It was feeding on my energy, my panic. As I tried to pull myself out, trying to stay calm, I noticed something. Shadows moving inside the walls. At first I thought it was just the house moving, in its unnatural way. But then I saw them again. Faint human shapes flickering just behind the wallpaper. Their outlines blended into the structure of the house. They weren't ghosts. They were people, trapped, unable to leave. I used my arms to pull one leg as free as I could, and what little support I could get I pulled the other out. I finally tore through the last of the membrane. I had given up trying to find the door, but there was a window nearby that gave me hope. Though with how much I had lost myself, I scrambled through the twisting corridors. I had no idea which floor I was on, but just as I was about to crawl out, I felt the house close in on me. The walls rippled, and something shot out of the floor. Vines from the house wrapped themselves around my legs and arms, pulling me back towards the pulsing walls. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed up. I disappeared into the thick air. The house wouldn't let go. The tendrils tightened, pulling me backwards, and the whispers in my mind grew louder. They were soft. They were desperate, pleading, almost panicked. "Stay with us, don't go. You belong here." They sounded like children's pleas. I struggled to free myself, but the harder I struggled, the more it pulled, pulling me back towards the center of the room. I could feel myself fading, the strength draining from my body, the weight of the house pressing down on me. My vision blurred, and I considered letting go for a moment. The whispers begged me to stay with them, their tone dripping with loneliness. But something inside me refused. I wouldn't let it win. With one last burst of energy, I reached up and grabbed the edge of the window and pulled myself through. The vines clung to me, tearing at my skin. As I pulled my legs free, they didn't let go easily. They weren't just tightly wrapped, but lined with something sticky. My skin felt hot where they touched. By the time I was halfway out, my arms were shaking, and I could feel the skin on my legs burning, where the house had clung, as if it had taken pieces of me with it. Blood soaked through my clothes, and my whole body ached with a deep searing pain. But I couldn't stop now. I gave one last tug, and with a scream I broke free, crashed through the window, and fell a story down onto the grass. My body pressed hard against the ground. The wind was knocked out of me, but I was outside. I was free. I lay there, gasping for breath, my chest on fire, every inch of me screaming in pain. I looked down at my legs, screaming in pain. The skin blackened where the house had burned me, and then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The whispers faded. The house went silent, as if nothing had ever happened. The air was still again, but I could feel it. Something inside me was different. I just lay there on the cold grass, gasping for breath. My chest rose and fell like a marathon runner. The oppressive weight that, inside the house, was gone, but I wasn't free of it. My body was shaking. Every muscle ached as if I'd been squeezed dry. I stared up at the sky, the stars distant and cold. I tried to convince myself it was over. Slowly, I turned my head to look back at the house. It stood there, as quiet and silent as it had always been. Just a dilapidated, abandoned building. Nothing about it looked out of place from here. The windows were dark, lifeless, and the porch was as empty as ever. The candy bowl still sat untouched, as if nothing had happened. I could feel it, deep in my bones. It wasn't just an old building. It was alive and waiting. The dark window seemed to be watching me like eyes, following my every move. And even though I was outside, I wasn't free. I tried to stand, my legs wobbling under me, but it felt as if my body had been drained of all its strength. Every movement was a struggle. My muscles refused to cooperate. My mind felt hazy, as if a thick fog had settled over it. I tried to piece together everything that had happened inside, but something felt missing. My memories were fragmented, pieces scattered and broken. I could remember the feeling of the house, tightening around me, the whispers clawing at my mind, but the details were blurred, slipping through my fingers. The harder I tried to remember, it was as if a part of me was still in there, trapped inside the walls, just like the people I'd seen. No matter how far away I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had taken something away from me, something I would have to go back in to get back. It had left its mark on me. I made it home that night, but nothing felt the same. Every step I took away from the house, I felt like I was dragging something heavy with me, something I couldn't see. I tried to tell people, my friends, my parents, about what had happened. I also told the police what I could, about the house. They didn't believe me. Some laughed it off as if it was some kind of prank, or a drug-induced memory, a wild trip on some laced sweets. No one understood. No one felt what I felt in there when I reported it. I didn't even try to explain how the house had felt alive, how it had taken something from me, because they wouldn't have believed it. They sent a unit and found the place, desolate, with a typical abandoned house layout, then lectured me on the dangers of trespassing in unstable structures. Weeks passed, and things felt like they were getting back to normal, but I couldn't shake it. The house, the pull, the whispers were still with me. I could feel it, even when I tried to pretend that everything was fine. And the same bowl of sweets was there when Halloween came around the next year, sitting on the porch just like always, despite everything, as I stood in front of the house and watched the locals enjoy the free candy. Memories I had forgotten flashed through my mind, the pain singing from the scars on my legs, vividly replaying the events of that night, in brief moments of clarity. And yet, despite the horrific experience, I still felt this pull, something stirring deep inside me, even though I knew what the house really was, even though I knew it had almost taken me. I couldn't help but look. Part of me still wanted to go back, as if the house hadn't finished what it started. I still live in that street, and when I sit in my room at night, I stare out of the window, the house just beyond the streetlight. It's quiet now, the same silence that has always surrounded it. But as Halloween approaches, the pull is stronger than ever. Sometimes, when all is dark and silent, late at night, I can still hear it, whispering,
Fin, distant.
but unmistakable, calling my name, telling me to come back. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I know the truth. The house isn't finished with me. I look out the window one last time, knowing it's only a matter of time before I can no longer resist the pull. One day, it will pull me back in, and the next time, I'm not sure, I will be able to escape.